Hollow Knight reminded me how important a good soundtrack can be for a game. I don't mean to say that I forgot that music is important in games. Music is incredibly important to the feel and tone of a game, even if only subconsciously. But for me, as someone who appreciates music, but is certainly not trained in music or music theory or anything like that, I often go through games without ever connecting with or consciously noticing the music. I love Hollow Knight, and I don't think I would love it as much if the music were not as good. I've experienced very few games where the music really jumps out and grabs me. I'm talking like opening YouTube and listening to the soundtrack on repeat kind of grabbing. The last two games where I experienced this were Persona 5 and Nier Automata. Before I played Hollow Knight, I would gladly tell anyone who would listen that Nier has the greatest video game soundtrack I'd ever experienced. Post Hollow Knight, my feelings are a bit less clear on the issue. And Persona 5 has a soundtrack that I wish could be the soundtrack to my life. In fact, I do often use it as background music while at work. I digress, but those two games kind of set the stage for my expectations for a good video game soundtrack, and Hollow Knight met every expectation. Hollow Knight will forever be amongst my pantheon of video game music. When I started playing and dropped into Dirtmouth, the music was nibbling on the edge of my consciousness. I didn't yet know what was to come. Forgotten Crossroads is, in my opinion, fairly unmemorable. Less memorable than Dirtmouth, honestly. But once I got to Green Path, well, in Green Path, I fell in love with this game and with this soundtrack. At that point, there was no turning back. I was enthralled. The music was perfect. There is more going on in Green Path than anywhere else, and the music matches that. I said it at the time, and I still stand by this. Early on, Hollow Knight felt like a cozy game experience. And probably 90% of that feeling was due to Green Path. I had heard so much about how punishing Hollow Knight is, but I never heard anything about how cozy it is. And maybe I'm just on an island by myself here, but seriously, the music envelops you like a warm blanket. And the scenery is like a dense forest in Green Path. Most of Hollow Knight is lonely and desolate, but in Green Path there is life aplenty. I didn't want to leave the area because it meant that the music would change. I still felt so much wonder and curiosity about what was to come in this game, and I loved every minute in Green Path. Green Path is still arguably my favorite track, but Hollow Knight continued to hit on track after track as I progressed through the game. The next big moment for me was City of Tears, and it was in a completely different way. I generally enjoy the rain, and hearing the rain along with the soothing soundtrack for the city was relaxing. First you hear the harp, then the melodic vocals come in. It is simultaneously reminiscent of the divine, it's sad, and it's uplifting all at once. Combine that with the pitter-patter of the rain on the glass windows, and I felt like a kid sitting at the window, watching a summer shower once again. From a gameplay perspective, I also like the juxtaposition in comparison to the prior areas in Hallownest. You of course start off in Dirtmouth and Forgotten Crossroads, which are bare and empty, followed by the highly inhabited yet primitive Green Path. And of course Fungal Waste is similar to Green Path in that regard. There's plenty of life in places like Green Path and the Fungal Wastes, but it's nothing like a city. It's no civilization. The City of Tears was the first place to suggest that there was a real advanced civilization here. Now the bugs are all dead, but you still get to see glimpses of what the city once was. When I arrived at the City of Tears, I just couldn't help myself. And so I stopped, and I stood at the window, and just watched the rain, and listened to the music, and listened to the sound of the rain. Then once I found the bench with Quirrell, I sat at the bench with Quirrell for a while. In that moment, any stress that I had been holding on to in real life melted away. So I wanted to embrace the calm and tranquility afforded by the rain and the music. I know I already said it once, but Hollow Knight was such a cozy game experience for me early on. Late game, not as much, but that's a whole other story. So far, I've only mentioned Hollow Knight's area background music, but the boss themes are just as outstanding. Boss music is tough because there's often a lot going on, and you can be forgiven for completely ignoring the music while simply trying to stay alive, especially in a game as demanding as Hollow Knight is. But Hollow Knight's boss themes demand to be noticed. From Hornet to the Mantis Lords to Grim and a whole host of other bosses in between, the boss themes are consistently fantastic. Mantis Lords is an iconic track, and it matches the intensity and the waltz that the fight demands. This is not an enemy to defeat, but a challenge to accept in order to gain access to a place where no normal bug should venture. And Grim, on the other hand, is apropos to the setting in a very different way. It is baroque and fits Grim's vampire-esque figure perfectly. How can you not think of Dracula when you hear that organ? It is a dance just like the Mantis Lords, but it is much more haunting. You are fighting a demon, albeit a very charismatic one, and as the fight progresses, you learn of his true metal nature. Grim's fight is a challenge, of course, but I loved every minute of it because I got to listen to this song over and over again. There are many more tracks that I could gush about, but I want to end on one that is probably underrated and was extremely important for my playthrough. And that is White Palace. White Palace upped the platforming difficulty compared to anything I had seen to that point in the game. But that was okay, because I was accompanied by the music of White Palace every step of the way. Despite the many spinning blades of death that you must traverse to find the King Soul, White Palace is a shockingly meditative experience. It can be frustrating. Very frustrating, trust me. But for me at least, the music helped keep me grounded and in the present. I had lots of moments of standing and staring at the puzzle pieces to determine the perfect time to jump through. And I often found myself humming or whistling along with the music as well. White Palace encapsulates so much of my experience with Hollow Knight. This world is dying. It is forgotten. It is dead in many ways. And it is quiet in so many places. And yet it is a beautiful world. This game isn't half as frustrating as Dark Souls or even Elden Ring, for example. There are legitimate gameplay reasons for that, but some of it is simply down to the music. It is hard to stay upset or annoyed when the music is so potent. It took me far too long to play Hollow Knight. I have technically beaten the game at this point, but there's still more that I want to accomplish. When I first began, I never considered that I might want to do anything other than simply finish. But it didn't take long for me to start considering whether I wanted to 112% the game. There are many reasons why this game is amazing, but the music is close to the top of the list for me. It is one of the best video game soundtracks I have ever had the pleasure of experiencing, and I highly recommend others to jump on into Hollow Knight, even if it's just to listen to some good music.